Prairie Yard and Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org. Diamond Willow Advanced Care Assisted Living, providing custom homes with smaller settings designed especially for high care needs.
Tom and I live in a neighborhood where people take great pride in their yards. Almost everyone has gardens, flowers, and very nice lawns. If one person is out mowing, it doesn't take long and other mowers start up too. There are several neighbors who take having a healthy and beautiful lawn to a very high level, and today's show is dedicated especially to them and to the rest of us who try. When I grew up on the farm, we never had a lawnmower. Well, at least not the motorized kind. Our cows grazed on the prairie grasses right up to the house and around the whole farmstead. I really admired the lovely green lawns that my cousins in town had to mow several times a week. Today we are visiting with Jon Trappe, who's going to give us lots of great tips to having a healthy and beautiful lawn. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you very much for having me, Mary.
Jon, what kinds of grasses did my cousins and anybody that has a beautiful green lawn, what kind of grasses are usually included in those mixtures?
Typically, most lawns in this area of the state or this area of the country are cool season grasses, and they're pretty much made up of Kentucky bluegrass, fine fescue, maybe some perennial ryegrasses, and tall fescue.
What do you mean by cool grasses?
Cool season grasses, those are a classification of grasses that just grow best in cooler climates. So when they're actively growing, when they grow best, it's when in the cooler parts of the year, in the fall or the spring.
What are the advantages to using different types of grasses in the mixtures rather than just, everybody's familiar with Kentucky bluegrass, but you talked about a mixture.
Yeah, so in many cases it serves to be better to have a mixture of grasses in case you have a disease or some other pest that prefers one species or the other. So that way you have a diversification in the stand. So that way if a pest comes through, you don't lose the entire lawn or the entire stand.
When is the best time to seed a lawn?
The best time in the state of Minnesota is probably falls between August 15th and September 1. And that's because you have reduced weed pressure, and at the time of establishment, the grasses are growing the best, so they can, we have time to establish them before the winter, and then they'll be ready for the following spring. The spring is the second best time to establish a lawn, but you're also going to be competing with summer annual grasses like crabgrass, for example. So as you're trying to establish the lawn, you're actually providing a great environment for some of those weeds as well to come in. So it can be a little bit more tricky, but it can be done as well.
How about if you want to just thicken it up? You know, you maybe have some bare spots after the winter. Is it okay to just go out and put some lawn seed over the top, or how should you do that?
So that's always that's kind of the million-dollar question as far as taking care of a lawn is whether or not, okay, should I fully renovate the lawn and start over, or should I just try to repair the really problematic areas? And in general, it's kind of up to you as what you'd like to do, but But it just kind of depends on the problem. If it's a thin lawn, maybe you can recover it with some increased fertilizer. If you have lots of weeds, maybe you just should be taking care of the weeds themselves. But in general, going out and just adding more seed to the lawn without trying to prepare the seed bed is not very effective. So some people have overseeding has traditionally been thought of as being an effective way of improving your lawn, and what we found is that overseeding can be, unless you're doing something to prepare a void for the seed to come in contact with the soil, overseeding is not very effective, and it's just better to try to improve the health of the lawn through cultural practices like better mowing and fertility and maybe irrigation as well. One thing that can be very effective is to use an aerifier or an aerator, and to one that actually pulls cores. As you pull the cores, you're doing two things. You're creating a void for the seed to come in contact with the soil, and you're adding soil to the surface. And as you roll or mow over that, you're breaking down that soil over time, and you're adding that as a top dress layer over that seed. And that'll work as well. And then the added benefit of using the aerator is that you're relieving soil compaction. If you were to try to renovate your lawn from seed, using an aerator would be a great way of doing that.
And when is the best time to do that?
The same time that you would be doing that you would be seeding the lawn, early autumn, and early fall.
Okay, so that is called aeration. What is the difference between that and dethatching?
So aeration relieves compaction. Dethatching is removing a thatch layer, and it's just basically lightly scratching the soil surface and trying to break down a thatch mat layer that may develop over time in the lawn, and so which can become problematic as well.
Okay. In the spring of the year, I sometimes see that people will go out and they really mow their lawn short. And is that a good idea? And does that help to remove that thatch? Or give us your thoughts on that.
So we recommend just keeping a consistent mowing height throughout the whole year, whether it's really early spring or very late fall. Just a consistent mowing height. And as far as trying to determine what is that best mowing height, typically we say the higher the better, within reason of course, but the higher the better, because a taller mown grass will require lower amounts of water, will be more resistant to weeds, more resistant to insects, and in some cases many diseases as well it'll be more resistant to. So, and you have to mow it less frequently if you mow it taller. But in general, if I had to give a number, I would say somewhere between 3 and 4 inches is a very typical mowing height for most of the lawn grasses adapted for Minnesota.
Okay, so you don't recommend taking it short right after the winter for that first mowing in the spring?
In most cases, that's not necessary. If your lawn gets a lot of spring dead spot, which is or snow mold, for example, you may have to remove that dead tissue if your lawn suffered a lot of loss from the winter. Removing that tissue may be beneficial to open up the crowns of the plant, but in general, we recommend just keeping a consistent mowing height.
Okay, so don't take it too low in the spring of the year.
Correct.
Okay, when should a person fertilize?
So fertility, if indeed you choose to fertilize a lawn, because in most cases, most homeowners don't actually fertilize their lawn, but if indeed you are choosing to fertilize your lawn, whether it's for maintenance or you're trying to renovate or improve it over time, the fall works out to be the best time. Again, that's because that's when the plants are growing the best, and so they're going to be more likely to be able to take up a greater amount of that fertilizer. So we recommend applying about 75% of the plant's needs in the fall and about 25% in the spring. In general, that would be starting sometime in middle of August and applying fertilizer no later than the end of September.
How early in the spring? Like right away as soon as the snow melts, or should you wait a little bit longer once it gets started?
I would wait until a few weeks after that thaw, when you start seeing that first flush of growth and you start seeing that first mowing. Late April, early May would be pretty sufficient for that. So as far as a particular product, in general, we recommend a fertilizer that has both slow and quick release nitrogen. Nitrogen is the most essential part of the fertilizer. That's the most essential nutrient that the plants need to grow and develop. And so What you're going to be looking for is on the fertilizer label, you'll see 3 different numbers. So something like a 12-12-12, for example, will have 12% nitrogen. 12 is the first number. And so you're looking for a product that has both slow and quick release nitrogen. And that'll provide an immediate response to the plant as well as a prolonged release for the plants as they continue to grow and develop throughout the season.
How about weed and feed? I've seen those advertised too. Do you recommend those?
So a weed and feed product is very popular to use because it's providing nutrients for the plants as well as potential some weed control for some broadleaf or grassy weeds. In general, they're a little bit higher cost per pound of nitrogen. So their main focus is to try to just control both of those issues. But they can be a little bit more costly, and quite honestly, they're not as effective as trying to fertilize separately from controlling the weeds separately. But for a homeowner who's just looking to just kind of maintain their lawn, then I think that they can certainly be effective.
Should you, when you're mowing, should you bag your clippings each time or put those back on the lawn for nutrition for the lawn?
We actually recommend to almost never bag your clippings and always return or mulch your clippings. And part of that's because by mulching and returning the clippings to the soil, you are returning nutrients to the soil. By bagging clippings and taking them and composting them off-site, you're effectively removing 1/3 of the plant's needs for nitrogen through the year, or you would have to fertilize 1/3 more. So by returning clippings, you're keeping the nutrients there on the site. The only exception to that is if you have excessive leaf litter in the fall, but in general we still recommend to mulch the leaves and just continuously to mow there as well.
Now let's get to another whole part of it. How about watering? How often should the plants be watered?
In general, most grasses need about 1 inch of moisture per week. And in the state of Minnesota, that works out, we average somewhere around 40 to 44 inches of precipitation throughout the year. And obviously that's not consistent, that doesn't always come down, especially from snow. The plants can't exactly use a lot of that. But the plants get enough to survive is the key word there. So how often should you water? We recommend to water deeply and infrequently. So to water deeper into the profile. So when you do actually have to water, you water at a higher amount, but you water less frequently. So how often that may be, just water based off the plant's needs. When you see it starting to wilt, that's when you should consider going out and watering. And by wilting, if you were to walk out on the lawn and you see that your footprints are still there and you see that the plants haven't stood back up after, say, a couple of minutes, the plants are probably in wilt stress, which is an early indication of drought stress.
Oh, that's good to know. If you water, when is the best time to water? Morning, afternoon, evening?
If you do need to water, between 6 and 8 a.m. is ideal. That's because you have lower wind, which would affect the distribution of the water, and you have lower evaporation rates. So it's a little bit cooler. The sun isn't quite out, so the water that you do apply will be more likely to get into the soil for the plants to be able to use.
Okay, well that's good to know. Does it hurt the lawn if in the summertime, come August time, it generally gets pretty dry? Does it hurt the lawn when it turns brown?
So brown can sometimes be good. That's just the plant just showing that it's going into dormancy in many cases. Many of the grasses that do grow in Minnesota have a natural defense mechanism for drought, and where they can avoid that drought and they go into a summer dormancy. Typically, we recommend if the plants have been without precipitation for 30 days, if it hasn't rained in 30 days, they will have certainly been in drought or into dormancy at that point. That's when you could go out and water at that point to prevent death of the plants. But dormancy is a natural response by the plant, and we recommend just staying off of it. It's not actively growing, so you won't have to mow it. And then just try to stay off of it from a traffic standpoint.
Okay. How about weeds? Some of us have weeds in our lawn. What do you recommend to take care of that problem?
So weed control, I think that certainly varies. We generally classify weeds, whether it's a broadleaf weed or a grassy weed, what you want to do is you want to first be able to identify the weed and understand which one it is. We have a lot of great resources on our website, turf.umn.edu, on how to identify particular weeds, for example, and then how to effectively control them once you've identified them. So first you need to understand what the weed is, and you need to understand its life cycle. So crabgrass, for example, if you have a lot of crabgrass and you're already at the middle of the summer when you want to start controlling it, in many cases it's better just to wait until next year and then try to control it then, because it's an annual grass. So broadleaf perennial, for example, should be controlled in the spring or in the fall, we just try to manage the weed at an optimum plant for your turf and for the weed itself to be more suppressed or to be easier to control.
How and when do you control weeds in the lawn?
So the best defense for weeds is a dense, healthy turf. So you should start, ideally you'd like to start by having a nice lawn. In that case you're going to be less likely to get weeds. But if indeed you do have weeds, the best time to control for them is in general is in the fall for broadleaf weeds and then throughout the growing season for grassy weeds. But the summer annuals like crabgrass, for example, if you know that you have a problem with crabgrass from the previous year, you can put down something like a pre-emergent herbicide to restrict the crabgrass emerging and filling in those areas in your lawn. But in general, good cultural practices are the best defense against weeds and the best control for them as well.
What are the best things that you can do to put your lawn to bed so that it'll come back good and healthy the following year?
So as far as putting your lawn to bed, some people apply a quick release fertilizer like urea, where it can be released in just a few days and the plant will be able to take it up and store those nutrients for the winter and then be able to use them again in the spring when they basically wake up in the spring and soil temperatures begin to increase. But as far as putting your lawn to bed, a quick release fertilizer like urea is a good way to do that.
What are some of the research things that you're doing? I mean, are you working with different species of grasses or lawn mixtures, or tell us a little bit about some of the things you're looking at.
So here at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Horticultural Science, we do a lot of turf grass research that's related to reducing the number of inputs for home lawns and golf courses. We also do a lot of research related to roadsides and on the roadways. So our big theme of our program is just trying to reduce the inputs, and sometimes that's using alternative grass species that require fewer inputs. Sometimes it's just breeding grasses that again require fewer inputs.
I know that I've heard the term low mow grass. What is that?
Low mow grass is contrary to the name, is not a grass that's actually mown low. It's a grass that's mown less frequently. So lower number of mowing events throughout the year.
Okay.
So in most of the time that you hear it that referred to as, it's most of the time that's a fine fescue species, and those just require fewer mowing events throughout the year.
And then, is it true that there are some people that are kind of almost going back to what I grew up with, and that maybe using some of the more native or prairie species of for grasses for lawns too? Absolutely.
They're certainly becoming more and more popular, just trying to reduce the amount of maintenance required for the lawn. Ideally, we would like to be able to use grasses that are native to that are native or very well adapted to an area. And in that case, many times that would be preferred.
You mentioned that you're doing some research on grasses for a roadside. Why is that important?
So grasses, turf grasses in particular, have a very high salt tolerance, and especially compared to most other plants that can grow in an environment like a roadside, for example. It's a very low input, very harsh environment. And in many cases, grasses, the same grasses that we have in our lawns, are some of the best grasses to be planting on roadsides, strictly because of the amount of salt that's being applied.
Would you be willing to show us some of your research plots?
Absolutely. Let's go take a look.
Okay.
I have a question. How do you design hanging baskets or containers?
Very important component of successful garden, container garden baskets is the selection of the plant material. I try to use materials that are very durable and last the whole season. And also I try to place them properly in the basket. So there's upright plants which are in the center of the basket and grow probably the tallest. There's fillers that come out to the edge of the basket and fill in the base of the tall upright plants. And then there's also the trailers that are placed on the side of the basket. At the planting time, you can incorporate slow-release fertilizer into the soil blend, and it will be there for the plant to rely on all season. But also weekly, we water them with a slow-release fertilizer, which really makes them shine and flower, and the foliage is very healthy. Other maintenance, such as pinching or deadheading, various things to keep them compact and full. Watering is very, very important also. Watering them once a day thoroughly from top to bottom. This is the key to these successful baskets that I have created for the Arboretum.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
Well, Mary, we're standing out here at the Turfgrass Research, Outreach, and Education Center here in St. Paul, Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus. And this particular experiment station we are essentially standing in research and education outreach plots where we can test different turfgrass seed mixtures, new alternative species, best management practices for lawns or for golf courses or athletic fields. We even work with things for like bee-friendly lawns and things like that. So, but again, the overall theme is just to try to reduce the amount of inputs for maintaining the lawn. And what we're standing on right here is what we mentioned earlier is a low Mow Fine Fescue. And this particular plot we're just basically looking at some different management practices on how a homeowner might be able to better use this type of lawn.
The seed heads here are light colored. Are those the fescue seed heads themselves?
That's correct. So this particular type of aesthetic is very common on golf courses in England, for example, on links-style golf courses with these fine fescues. So these seed heads can provide some aesthetic value. That's something that is becoming more and more appealing for homeowners and golf courses alike.
How long has this plot been here?
This is 2 or 3 years old.
Oh, okay. And does this get watered because it's so beautiful green?
This never gets watered and will basically look like this throughout the year.
Oh, really? So if it does go dormant, if it does get dry, will it come back again then in the fall?
Absolutely. Just like our typical other lawn grasses, it can go into summer dormancy if it needs to, but in general, most of the time they'll be able to survive.
I could see where not only would this be nice in a naturalized area in somebody's yard, but if you have an office and you don't need to mow that very often, this would be a beautiful grass mixture to use.
That's absolutely the idea behind these, is to as an alternative lawn type for a situation that still provides some aesthetic and some functional benefits, but requires fewer maintenance inputs like mowing or irrigation.
Okay, and I see you have some of our friendly thistles in the background. How do you control those?
So thistles can be a problematic broadleaf weed. Most broadleaf herbicides will actually control thistle. In most broadleaf herbicides for lawn that are marketed towards lawns, for example, will include a product that's like a 3-way herbicide, and that's a product that will include 2,4-D, Mecoprop, and dicamba. And those products will that product alone, or that combination product, will be able to effectively control this thistle.
Okay. Well, I can sure you see a use for this. How about some of your other research?
So some of the other research that we do is related to reducing inputs and things like that. So we do some research on natural weed suppression. We do research on salt tolerance for roadsides, reducing the maintenance inputs such as mowing or irrigation, more drought-tolerant seed mixtures for homeowners, and then also breeding for turf grasses that require lower nitrogen or lower mowing as well.
Natural weed suppression. Can we go see that?
Sure, let's go take a look. So Mary, you might be familiar with some plants don't grow very well underneath the black walnut trees. And part of that's because it's just a natural adaptation for the black walnut to try to make itself more competitive. And what we found is that many plant species have this trait as well. And so where we're standing right now is we're actually standing in an area where we're trying to get crabgrass to grow. And the reason why we're doing that is because we're trying to breed for this natural weed suppression, just like this black walnut. We're trying to breed for this characteristic in fine fescues. And this particular trial where we're standing at is we're testing 20 different fine fescues for their ability to naturally suppress crabgrass. As you look around, you'll notice that some plots have a lot fewer number of crabgrass plants than others do. And this is great news for us, and it's something that we hope to, in the future, incorporate into our breeding program, and with the idea being that homeowners or anybody else will be able to use these fine fescues with having to apply fewer pesticides to control crabgrass, for example.
This is really interesting. Thank you, Jon, for all of this wonderful information.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Just in case the audience, if anybody would like any more information, they can visit our website where we have lots of extension or outreach materials. It's all freely available and is all really great content.
Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yekel Julien, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org. Diamond Willow Advanced Care Assisted Living, providing custom homes with smaller settings designed especially for high care needs.